I remember when I was 33, I had a secure job. I worked as a travel agent. I had a mortgage and a house, and I remember getting quite a clear call from God to give up my work at the time and take a year out with Youth for Christ and oversee the sports project called Kick. I didn't know where that was going. People thought I was crazy doing all that. It was quite a distinct call on my life. Ultimately, at the end of the year out, I was offered a job with Youth for Christ and had lots of opportunities serving God through that for a number of years, and I wouldn't be here today if I hadn't taken that opportunity, that leap of faith.
Who would have thought a wooden hut would have an impact on my life? In 1960, I moved to Cumbernauld Newtown at the age of 14. It was the beginning for many. The town only started a couple of years before, and the only church was a simple wooden hut in the woods. It soon became the centre of my life as I joined the youth club, the BB, the football team, attended services, and was the bell ringer in the church hut. I felt part of a community, got to know lots of new people, learned about Christian life, and lots of laughs in the process. Life for me had changed radically. How did I feel? Part of something great, different and new. The minister, Stuart McGregor, who was in his 20s, was very enthusiastic. He ran weekend retreats for youth at an old house where we discussed many of the issues of life, which was great for a 15-year-old, and I remember these days well.
A few years ago, Fiona and I were in the Lake District and we went to an Anglican church where they happened to be serving communion that day. And when the guy was serving communion, he stood at the front and he said, "This is the Lord's table." And it struck me in a way that it never struck me before, that it didn't matter who I was or what I'd done wrong or what people thought of me. This was the Lord's table and he was the one inviting me and others. And I just found that quite an emotional and spiritual moment.
A special occasion for me when I felt God's presence was the service I attended at Mahakalguri Church, our twin church in northeast India. It was during my visit there in November 2019 with Robin Hamilton and Jackie Bell. The simple wooden church was packed full with people of all ages that Sunday morning. We were warmly welcomed as special guests, and there was obvious delight that we had gone out there to visit them. The youth group opened the service with 3 rousing hymns. Later, both a men's choir and a women's choir sang hymns. We were moved by the enthusiasm and joyfulness of the worship and felt privileged to be part of such a special occasion and to see God at work in this community.
Christmas 2013 wasn't good. I was alone. I decided to watch a video I would recommended to discover it was in black and white and silent. It's King of Kings and I can't remember much about it except the scene with Mary Magdalene. She was dancing provocatively before Jesus, trying to seduce him while he stood there with a quiet, serene look on his face. Suddenly, devils began to come out of her body, becoming more and more frantic as her dancing failed to have the effect. So suddenly they disappeared and Mary threw herself at the feet of Jesus in worship. I confessed to tears. I had a new understanding of Jesus, beyond the historical Jesus of my upbringing, a paper, unthreatening figure, gentle and mild, beyond the Jesus of the Bible, fascinating and instructing, beyond the Jesus of tomorrow, there if needed, always ready to answer. It was an intensely spiritual moment, as I realized Jesus was indeed a living and powerful Lord, walking with you, enveloping you in his love. And since that day, when walking or at prayer, I feel his strong presence alive and with me.
So during COVID, when things were all quite tricky and things were very overwhelming, I enjoyed going out and to run. And one day I was out, I was feeling quite overwhelmed, and I was running along past East Peach. And that day there was massive waves coming over. And if you've seen them, you'll know they splash over the wall. And I stopped to watch the waves. And I was just struck by God's power. I was taken back to the story of Jesus on the boat with his disciples and how he was able to say, "Be still," and the waves were still. And I just felt God saying, "Be still," because God was in charge. And I just needed that moment right then.
They say the night is at its darkest just before dawn. That's true. If you look out at 3 o'clock in the morning, you'll find how dark the night is. Often I don't see God because everything around me is so dark. Sometimes I can't see God because my mood does not reflect joyfulness. Sometimes as a Christian, I feel overwhelmed by problems, personal situations, difficulties, you name it all. And sometimes I never see God in this situation. I have nerve to turn around and say to God, "Where are you? Why aren't you here?" Being a single parent has made me very lonely, found it very difficult to open up. I've struggled, I felt isolated, and sometimes I just don't want to be part of people. And I often wonder, where is God in all this? And then suddenly I start looking quietly at who God is. And I discovered God in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. I discovered God dealing with imperfect people, dysfunctional families, not because they were good, not because they were sinless, but because of his grace. And that was one of the most beautiful things I've ever discovered about God. That God's grace and mercy transcend even the worst sinner. Sometimes I am staggered when I look at how God dealt with many of the flawed individuals in the book of Genesis. And that was where I learned that God, in my darkest moment, God taught me how to love.